5 years in digital marketing agencies before taking her talents to the talent acquisition world. Now she thrives on helping talent acquisition leaders and recruiters learn and excel in marketing best practices to bolster their recruitment marketing strategies and improve the candidate experience. We're very honored to have Kirsten Davidson joining us today as well. Kirsten is head of employer brand at Glassdoor, where she is responsible for sustaining and growing Glassdoor's vibrant employer brand while navigating the challenges that come with hypergrowth. Her work includes leveraging Glassdoor's powerful data to provide insight and learnings that help global employers navigate a new world where the lines between recruiting, marketing, brand, and culture are increasingly blurred. All right, so just a quick overview of our agenda today. We're going to be covering the answers to these questions. What is source of influence? Why does it matter to your organization? And how can you use it and track it to inform your recruiting strategy? And then at the end, we'll have a Q&A, as we mentioned. All right, so Kirsten, why don't you take it away for us?
Great, thanks so much. Welcome to everyone who's joining us. So to start out, let's just talk about a little bit about source of influence. So if we step back for a second, we think about employer branding. That's really about thinking about candidates as consumers and how we market to them. The process of recruitment marketing is about finding, attracting the candidates to your brand, and think about that marketing funnel. Right? We attract them at the top, engage them throughout the process as they consider your company, nurturing them kind of all along the way, and then all the way through apply for the appropriate position. And that's because today's job search, as you know, is not a straightforward one. Candidates don't just come to your site, find a job, submit a resume, come in, interview, and get hired. Right? It's much less linear. It crosses online, offline, multiple touch points along the way, and it's really tough to be able to measure where they're going, what's the best source of influence along the way, your website, career site, news sites, blogs, social media, et cetera, et cetera. On the next slide, we see source of hire versus source of influence. So when we talk about source of hire, it's one of the most commonly used recruiting metrics. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this. So it's tracking the last source that a candidate used before they applied. And mostly that's because that's the data we can get. Right? You're able to go into your ATS system, see how many applied and where they came from. And that's useful. You want to understand where they're applying, but it's not the whole picture because there's a lot of stuff that happens before they get there. So in today's world, we have social media, employer branding efforts that you're doing, digital marketing, you have events. Employers need to be able to understand how all of this fits together, and then how is that a return on investment. If you can't identify that, where people are coming from and what the ROI is on the different pieces, it's really hard to ask for more budget to support your needs. So when we talk about source of influence, it's more than just a metric. It's really a way of understanding the candidate journey and how you follow along from attraction to application. So attracting the effectiveness of each of your recruiting channels. So in today, we really want to help guide you in defining your source of influence, understanding why it matters to your company, how to monitor and track it in order to optimize your strategies along the way.
Yeah, that's honestly a great introduction to source of influence, Kirsten. And I think it's going to be exciting today because I'm coming from a marketing and a technology lens, and Kirsten is going to be coming from an employer brand lens. So it's going to be really interesting, and you guys are going to get all of the angles. So let's get into it. Source of influence, as Kirsten said, tracks all of the touch points in the candidate and journey from first point of attraction all the way through hire. So simply, that's really all of your recruitment marketing channels and campaigns. But traditionally, you can see that talent acquisition teams have primarily focused on the bottom of the funnel, and they have data from that source of apply through hire in the ATS. But what about the top of the funnel? That's recruitment marketing. Every effort you use to find, attract, engage, and nurture leads to convert into applicants. And so this funnel may look linear, but the candidate journey really isn't as linear as this funnel looks, as Kirsten also mentioned. Source of influence touch points can happen in any order and on any path from awareness through application. And currently, for most organizations, that blue part of the funnel is dark. they don't really know what's happening in these stages because the ATS can really only track from apply on, which means you're missing everything a lead does from awareness to interest. And that is so key because that's how they're really learning about your company and researching your employer brand.
Yeah, and I just want to chime in here. Nearly 90%, so 89% of our users we see are either actively looking for jobs or would consider better opportunities. That's also a huge number of people who are already employed. So when you think about this funnel, it's not just the people who are actively looking for you, it's also those passive candidates who, while they're in a job, are open to consideration along the way. So extra challenges for all of us.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I look at it as if we were still only marketing jobs or using just job boards as the main channel, we would still only really need to track that one source. But instead, the candidate is using many, many sources on their journey to find their next career. And you can see that's a really long list of sources. And this probably isn't even an exhaustive list either. 10 years ago, this list might have been just one, just job boards. But now there are more and more channels that play a role in how a modern candidate lead finds and engages with your brand and then actually applies. And source of influence tracking is really about measuring as many of these as you can, and if you can track it accurately, do it. And so this kind of aligns with marketing. And so we talk a lot at SmashFly about how recruitment, marketing, and recruiting aligns with marketing and sales. And as a marketer, I thrive on understanding how leads turn into customers and how they're going through social media, if they're attending webinars, if they're downloading specific content pieces, until they're finally ready to talk to a sales rep. And the vast majority of our customers, unfortunately, don't just show up knocking at our door. They're listening, they're learning, they're searching, and they're engaging. And that's exactly the same thing when it comes to candidates. We wish they would show up ready to apply in 1 second and top quality candidates would be there, but really they're doing a ton of other research. If we didn't look at all of these channels, we really wouldn't know what to put our budget and resources to.
Yeah, and I just wanted to also share on here that it's really moving as you look at this from kind of this transactional method to ones that are really relationship-based. So there's the where and what you do. There's also this how piece and how you engage and show up. So from an employer brand perspective, it's not just the pretty pictures, but it's how do you bring that to life in the interactions you actually have with people and the kind of actual touch points where you meet with them or you reach out to them and keep them warm throughout it. That personal touch is a really key element.
Yeah, I love that you bring up the word relationships because talent acquisition is really moving towards it, building relationships now and for the future. And all of these touch points are really what's building that connection with an organization and a candidate. So why does this matter now to your organization? And as Kirsten and I have already touched on a little bit, it matters because of candidates and because candidates are changing. Candidates are acting more and more like consumers in their research for a career, which means there are going to be more and more touch points that they're interacting with and that are influencing their decision of where to apply or where not to apply. And so they expect a lot: personalization, relevance, proactive outreach. They're expecting organizations to be on the channels that they use. And they really want to be educated about this next big decision in their lives and have a connection with that brand. So it makes sense as candidates are increasing their means of interacting with us and our organization that we also need to increase our tracking of all of those touch points. And I think that this is a great next stat. We used this in a previous Glassdoor webinar that we did on the candidate experience, and it's just so telling that before making a decision to apply, job seekers use an average of 18 sources and look at an average of 7 to 8 reviews. And about a year ago, I saw a similar consumer stat that only revealed 10 to 12 touch points. You can see that, as time goes on, there's more sources, and the candidates are really mirroring how consumers are researching. And that makes sense. We're conditioned to be educated, head to the web, look for reviews, and learn before we purchase or apply. And we really do care about others' experiences when it comes to using a product or service, as well as when it comes to finding that new career. And the big takeaway here is that we cannot be overlooking these 18, different channels that will influence your interested candidate to take action. So in order to understand and improve the candidate experience, we really have to track as much as we can the candidate journey.
So let's talk a little bit about why your source of influence matters. Recruiting, marketing, and source of influence really go hand in hand, right? Organizations are shifting to a more proactive recruitment marketing strategy that helps them find, attract, engage, nurture candidates all the way through all the channels that we use. I think one of the things that's important to think about is it's one thing to go after people who are looking for you and make sure you're putting the jobs in front of them in a very kind of transactional way. But I think kind of the holy grail for all of us is how do you get those more passive candidates? A lot of times the top talent that you're looking for are already employed. So when you think about that, it's not enough to just post a job, track who applies. It's really essential that you're engaging where people are. You're fishing where the fish are, right? So where are they at on social media? How do you engage there? Hosting your recruiting events, maintaining your Glassdoor reviews, building your talent network, and really creating a personalized career site experience. So Lisa was just talking about this personalized piece. And I think what's important there is that you're not trying to appeal to everyone. You want to appeal to the right person, and not everyone is the right person for your company. I think it's easy to sort of feel like, I have to do all these things, I have to be perfect in all these ways. But the more that you know who you're looking for and who your audience is, and this is, taking a page out of marketing, they don't just market to everyone. You're marketing to your customer, and recruitment marketing is no different. So you really want to know where they're going, and then how do you optimize those strategies for those different audiences?
Yeah, I think that personalization is really key, and I think that's a key point in recruitment marketing, is trying to better understand what types of candidates that you're actually reaching. And a really simple way to connect source of influence in recruitment marketing to me is that your sources of influence are your recruitment marketing channels. They really almost are the same thing, which is why talent acquisition is taking a focus on recruitment marketing and that top of the funnel. They're realizing that there's so many touch points that comes before apply. So that's why they really go hand in hand, because they're actually similarly the same thing. And this ties really well into this consumer theme that we've been talking about. So another reason why source of influence is so key is because that candidate journey starts long before they apply. And I think traditionally talent acquisition has looked at the candidate experience starting once they apply, through the apply process, through the interview process. But, with the emergence of the Candidate Experience Awards and the focus on the candidate journey, we realize that there's so much more before apply happens on your career site, subscribing to job alerts, attending a recruiting event. So when you really think about it, we've been tracking only one single source of apply, but that's not really the single source of hire. That single source of apply is the last source a candidate touched before they filled out that application, which is essential to understand where you're actually converting candidates. But that big metric is only one single source out of the 10, 15, 20 plus on that list that we saw earlier in the webinar. So we really need to be tracking source of applies plus every other touch point we can. And that's because the candidate journey has lengthened and it's become longer, and there's just much more touch points.
And when you look at your channels, you realize that certain channels are meant just to influence and nurture, not convert. So we've been talking a little bit about, the places that we go to really measure, but there's also the process of getting to know them and kind of wooing them throughout the journey. And it makes sense because the source of application comes from your job board, your career site search, but how do you figure out what attracted and influenced them? Because that's the important piece, right? Not every candidate is ready to apply right away. So It's how you bring them along. Well, we find 69% of job seekers on Glassdoor are likely to apply to a job if the employer manages their employer brand. If they see the employer engaging, writing reviews, they're more likely to apply, 69% more likely. That's just a Glassdoor stat, but I think it's indicative of what we see along the way, that people want to engage with an actively engaged employer. It's a strong message that you send that you care about your employees, you care about what's going on in building a great culture, and that's the kind of company people want to be part of, right? So you think about your recruiting events. How do you allow candidate leads to talk directly with your hiring managers? On social media, how do you encourage leads to ask a question? How do you engage with them with the content that you have? These are efforts that don't maybe have a specific link to apply, right? You don't talk to them on social media and then boom, they apply. But it's a powerful source of influencing them in the consideration process. It really allows you, though, as you start to track this, as you put cookies in place, as you get smarter about how to capture those folks, you can start to really maximize the time and money you spend on those events. So, for example, let's say you have a recruiting event. Maybe it's at a conference or somewhere else. You bring in hiring managers. You have the names of people who come. Maybe you hire 2 or 3 people out of that. That right there gives you some ROI that you can put back into your strategic plan to get budget as you go forward. So there are things that you wouldn't normally think of tracking because it's not always the direct approach to apply, but there are things that in the larger ecosystem of what you're doing have a really powerful impact on your ability to be even more successful.
Yeah, I think that you hit on a few key things there in terms of nurturing and building that relationship, which you mentioned earlier, Kirsten. And that's also a great stat. It's super telling about being proactive about your employer brand and really what that means to candidates. They don't want lazy brands. They want people that are trying to basically be authentic, be honest, be up to date. So talent acquisition needs to be built on fostering those relationships, right? Which is why things like following on social media and seeing updates daily or attending a recruiting event and talking to someone directly. Are they going to fill out an application right at the event? No, probably not. But that might be a really strong, precursor. They talked to someone they really like. They made a connection. They might then go apply on your career site. That career site would be the last source of apply, and you really wouldn't know the influence that, a recruiting event or social media had. So these are really stepping stones to building that relationship, and these channels can matter just as much as a job ad or a career site CTA in really driving quality hires to your organization. And so the last kind of number 4 here on why source of influence matters is because it really starts revealing your candidate motivations and behavior. And we just published a report with the analyst firm Aberdeen Group on how best-in-class organizations use recruitment marketing strategies. And in that report, we found that 46% of orgs surveyed said that improving the candidate experience is their number 1 priority in 2016 over anything else. And I don't really think that's a surprising stat based on, how much everyone is talking about candidate experience. But it really brings to light that a lot of organizations want to improve the candidate experience, but they're really missing the key necessity there. And that's actually understanding what drives candidates to apply to their job, not guessing. And so, of course, there are still certain things that we can hypothesize on. But the more that we can track through links and emails, talent networks, cookies, social media, the more informed we're going to be to put our budget to the right places. And source of influence tracking is really as close as we can get right now to getting inside the candidate's head. It eliminates a lot of that guesswork of what your candidates are doing and why they're doing it, and instead it helps us shape the candidate journey and fill those gaps. And Kirsten, you brought this up earlier as well in terms of personas and learning about which types of candidates do which types of actions. And this is another key benefit, that as you start tracking the specific candidates to specific job recs, you can really start seeing what might work better for engineers or for veterans or for high-volume positions. They're not all going to come in the same way and be influenced by the same content. So source of influence tracking can really help drive a better candidate experience for specific audiences in order for you to duplicate that success in the future.
And I would also just jump in on the persona piece. That sometimes can feel kind of overwhelming. Marketing's been doing it for a long time. A lot of money and budget goes into really trying to identify and segment, but it can be as simple as meeting with a couple of your engineers, asking them, like, what do you like about working here? What's the most valuable piece? What keeps you here instead of going to another company? Folding some of that stuff and those insights into your job descriptions, into social media and the tone of what you're trying to do. So you're not trying to game the system, but you want to make sure you're attracting the right people. And you can be kind of scrappy about that, right? You have most of the insights that you need in your organization. It can be a really powerful way, though, to speak more directly to the right people.
Yep, totally. And that's really what recruitment marketing is all about, is trying to understand what works best for target audiences. So the big takeaway over these kind of 4 why this matters now, and what we saw in the recruiting funnel, is that source of influence data is going to help illuminate that black hole, those gaps of what your candidates are actually doing before they click apply. And right now, there's just that giant question mark before the application process. We might have bits and pieces from a job board or from LinkedIn or from a social media tool, but it's not really one complete picture, and it's not all tracked the same way. And so really the big goal is that we need to have more insight at the top of the funnel, and we need to understand what channels are going to drive more quality leads in order to convert them into applicants. So we're going to get into the big question now, which is how do you track this? And really, how do you use it to inform what you're doing, which is really the big value. So in a perfect world, your talent acquisition team would make a hire and be able to see all or nearly all of the touch points that drove that candidate lead to your organization. And so this is really what marketing automation technology helps marketers see, how their leads funnel into prospects and then funnel into customers. We actually have predictive metrics of how many leads we'll need in order to turn into opportunity, in order to turn into a customer. We can get extremely predictive, and we have very good pipeline metrics due to that technology factor. Of course, there's still some gaps, but I don't know if I can speak for my team, but I have Pardot, which is our marketing automation technology, open all day long, tracking prospect activity, tracking who's downloading which pieces of content, if we have new blog subscribers, our email open rate, how our track links on social media are doing. It really helps inform my day-to-day because we're so driven by how prospects engage with all of our marketing efforts, so we can make tweaks. And really, technology is key. And the good news is that technology can enable that type of campaign and channel insight for recruiters and talent acquisition leaders as well. And the most accurate way to track source of influence is with technology that's purpose-built for candidate engagement and recruitment marketing. And unfortunately, that's not the ATS, but we'll get into that next. So the old way of tracking source of influence is, as we've talked about, just tracking source of hire. It's tracking that one point in the candidate journey that basically pushed a candidate to apply. It's that conversion point. And organizations typically track source of hire in 2 ways. They rely on candidate self-selection with a drop-down and offer, a few different sources, or through source code passing in the ATS, which can still be inaccurate, but it's definitely more accurate than relying on candidates. And source of hire, as we've said, is an important metric, and kudos if you are tracking it because it gives you that conversion point. But there's really limitations with both of these ways of tracking. And so relying on candidate self-selection leaves so much subjectivity for reporting. If you think about it, how often have you accurately marked how have you heard about us? I usually just mark whatever I see first or whatever jumps out to me. I'm not usually looking through the whole list to be as accurate as possible. So there's really just too much potential for human error subjectivity to rely on that as an accurate source. And then using source codes is a much more accurate way of tracking through technology, and using something like a recruitment marketing platform can ensure that accurate source codes are passed for each applicant. But that data is still only part of the picture. So then we look at the new way of tracking. And the new way of tracking is to accurately track that conversion point, source of hire, but also adding source of influence to augment your view of your entire recruitment marketing strategy. So technology like a recruitment marketing platform tracks each candidate's journey, from what content they view, to what job boards they visit, to if they've attended a recruiting event, or if they've clicked on your email, all in one dashboard and in the candidate record. So basically that's done through track links, cookies, pixels, across a variety of your recruitment marketing channels. And you can see that all in one place, and it's tracked all of the same way to kind of connect the dots of that journey. Plus, which is really important, what I was talking about in terms of marketing, is being able to see that entire view. And a recruitment marketing platform can actually integrate with any ATS. So you can see all of your recruitment marketing sources of influences plus the apply to hire in the ATS, which really gives you an end-to-end view of your recruiting funnel and thus a look into the candidate journey.
As you're talking, I'm wishing that we were all in person and I could just ask people to raise hands and tell us what they're doing, because I think that this is such a hard thing to do, and everyone's trying to figure it out, and different people have certain things figured out. I love talking about this, but I wish I could ask questions and have other people also chime in. Okay, so let's talk about what the source of influence metrics look like. So what are we actually trying to track here? What's possible? So you're looking at how many visitors come to your site. You look at maybe the majority, are the majority of them interacting with your brand on a mobile device, on a desktop, looking at content that they're engaging with before applying. Does it differ per group? Are marketing folks interacting with different content than maybe the engineers or the product folks? Looking at your latest college recruiting campaign, how did it perform in terms of email opens, click-throughs? How many of them joined your talent network as a result? How many then converted into applications or in your pipeline? And then how many sources are your candidates interacting with before they apply? These are all trackable pieces that are part of this larger ecosystem that allow you just more insight and to be more strategic about what you're doing. Google Analytics, also really valuable in tracking your candidate behavior and consumption, at least on your career site. When it comes to the pipeline metrics, or understanding applications and quality, it doesn't integrate with most ATS systems to show progress of sources through the application hiring process. Through a technology like SmashFly, you are able to track that full recruitment marketing funnel from view to hire, which is what we're talking about today. It's the piece that we're all trying to figure out. A really important way that you're able to see how each specific channel performs, from social to job boards to career site, referrals, campaigns, email campaigns. So I mean, SmashFly really is great because it can track all of those campaigns centrally. I also do, though, want to say that if you don't have technology in place to track this, I know it can feel really overwhelming, like, oh, there's all this stuff I need to do. My suggestion, though, is to start where you are. Launch internal surveys. When people are coming in to interview, have a set of questions that you can ask them to start to at least get a baseline. For people who are new hires or recently came in, go back out to them and ask them where they came from. What were the pieces that they saw along the way? How long maybe had they been watching your company? Just to get a baseline can really help.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion, Kirsten, because obviously not everyone has the technology in place or the budget for technology. So, you know, using candidate surveys and launching that feedback is a great way to get more insight, and it's definitely starting where you are and then growing and improving on that. Technology is obviously going to be the most centralized and accurate way of tracking, but you can always glean some type of insight and start from a baseline. One more point here is if you guys really look at these stats, this is a lot of insight. It's stuff that, we outline as marketers that every campaign we run, we want to know all of this information. How detailed can we get? How accurate can we be? And so this specific type of insight makes experimenting with new channels, improving your ROI so much easier. It really helps you build your case to your higher ups, your boss, your chief HRO or chief talent acquisition officer. It really helps you understand how your new campaigns are working and if you want to do it again. If it's really successful, how much easier is it to go and have all of these metrics point by point to then be like, we need more budget. This is working. So I just see it as the more trustworthy data in your arsenal, the better. And if you can understand it and put it to use, you'll really be able to prove which campaigns are working and really get buy-in from the top down. So this is sort of the last big section, and probably the most applicable, because it's really how to use source of influence data to inform your strategy and make changes. So the key benefits of source of influence tracking are, 1, understanding the candidate journey, and then 2, using it to really understand what tactics are working. So it's like taking off the blindfold and seeing what your candidates are actually doing pre-apply.
Lisa, you were talking about getting more granular and getting the data, and I think it's also about getting more granular even to identify from all the candidates who apply and the ones you hire, where are your top candidates coming from and really identifying your new top hires. Yes, we all want to hire all the talent and get everyone in the seats, but there are certain people who are the high performers. There's also the roles that are harder to fill, and going deeper, I think even deeper, into exploring where those folks are coming from can be a really valuable source. So is there a difference? Where was their first point of attraction? Did your company go out to them more specifically? Was it more personalized, which in many cases it is? How many sources of influence? Did they have a lot of conversations? Did they do their homework? Who were they talking to? Where did they look? Chances are they did a lot of research. These candidates often do. How long did it take them to apply? In many cases, it's longer than kind of your average candidate. And then were they part of your talent network? Did you have to go out and find them? Had they already come into you? I think one of the reasons that's such a key piece is as you're putting together your strategic program, part of what you're looking at is time to hire. Right? We all have our goals we're trying to hit off on. But if you can make a case to say, it actually is important for us to have a little bit more time, that actually gives us a better chance with the harder to hire candidates. That's something you can set as an expectation prior to going in and make sure that you are set up to be really successful. It's back in 2014, but there was a recruiting stat that we used quite a bit that, even back then, that the time that it takes to hire, from a candidate learning about a job to applying has grown 41%. So it's even a little bit more now, but that's an enormous challenge, an enormous amount of time where you need to be nurturing these folks. So understanding what's happening during that time is really key.
Yeah, and I think that's really a sign of a maturing talent acquisition industry and a mature recruitment marketing program is if you start moving just from the regular metrics into your quality metrics. And I think that's something really like exactly what you're saying. If more quality candidates that turn into hires are coming from one source, you'll be able to track that because you can see the entire end-to-end view. And so quality is really going to be the next step in understanding how to differentiate those top candidates from just the vast amount of numbers.
So talk a little bit about personas, but I want to kind of get into that a little bit specifically. So the aggregate of quality candidates and hires is beneficial, right? With the right technology and the right metrics, you're really allowed to go deeper, slice it up by data, job category, candidate populations, and again, so this goes back to personas, right? So very specifically, how do you do that? So let's say you take a specific job family that recruiters are prioritizing. For us, that's engineers. And what we look at is how many qualified candidates are coming in and through which source. So get really specific about that as a starting point. If you don't have a mechanism in place to track, again, do internal focus groups. So go out to those people, ask them the question. When people are coming in to interview, ask them very specifically and get your baseline so that you at least have something to start from. Look at your engineers. How did those candidates differ in their touch points, maybe from finance candidates, right? So once you have basic information on where different groups are coming in from, you can start to see where are there similarities, where are there differences, maybe how did specific email messages drive conversion, so by tracking your email messaging. So looking at all of those through a specific lens allows you to get really granular. The information helps you spend more in the effective areas and making sure you're getting the ROI, which is the people in seats, right, for certain roles, versus just using the same tactics for everyone. It can feel overwhelming to do this, but it's no more overwhelming than just having to do it at all. It's just a matter of segmenting and monitoring those different audiences.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, you're messaging anyways, and you're messaging to everyone, so it just takes a little bit more nuance and really understanding what works that I think will help you tweak. And I actually have a really great example that we're helping one customer build out an entire candidate touchpoint model that really outlines all the key touchpoints for specific audiences and what messages they might be looking for in each one. So this goes to that last data point, how does specific messaging drive conversion? So they're actually going through and figuring out the gaps that they have. What might this audience want on social media? What questions might they be having in an email nurture touch point? And they're building out this entire framework per touch point along the entire candidate journey and really ramping and creating that content specifically. And again, you would be maybe creating content anyways, but this is just going to give a little bit bigger results and more quality applicants. It really helps you prioritize those certain channels for certain job families to drive more action. And so a lot of analysis is retroactive, right? You get a report every month or every quarter or half of year. You're kind of looking back as, okay, well, all of this happened. What do we do for the next quarter? And it takes some time to shift that. I think what's really interesting about using technology like the recruitment marketing platform is getting that data in real time and really understanding how you can determine candidate fit as campaigns are happening. So say your analysis found that higher percentages of your quality candidates that go on to interview spend on average more time on your career site, or they click on more articles in your email. Within your recruitment marketing platform, you can actually filter and sort those leads in your pipeline that fit this activity criterion. So you see someone who has went to your career site and has clicked on 4 articles in your latest newsletter. You can actually target that lead, put them into a folder, and go back when a certain rep opens, because they're usually more likely, based on the data, to apply. And one of our customers actually has folders created for specific types of leads who are more likely to engage. So as they're running these specific campaigns, recruiters are dropping leads into specific folders for easy access and segmenting. So they don't have to start from scratch. They can go back for future sourcing needs, and they're not just pulling someone that doesn't know the brand and has never interacted with the brand. So you can really see how campaigns can drive real-time fit. And so the strongest value of source of influence, I think, as a marketer, is being able to reallocate your spend and to shift tactics more quickly and more effectively. A recruitment marketing strategy needs to be nimble, and it needs to be experimental, always trying new tactics to really reach the ever-changing candidate. And I think that we're seeing organizations really start to do unique campaigns and things because they're testing the waters, just as consumer brands are testing the waters. So a great example here is global engineering company CH2M was really focused on content for veterans on their social media channels. Using SmashFly, they actually started tracking the data, and they saw that it was actually their least engaging content on social. Veterans were just not engaging with it. They weren't getting any clicks on the articles. So after spending all of this budget and time on, paid social media, creating content, they really realized that the effort wasn't warranted and that their military recruiting strategy needed a different channel. This wasn't the way that they were reaching them. So in the end, they actually allocated more posts to the audiences that were receptive and went a different route for military recruiting. The end result was that they really saw more engagement with the right audiences on the right channel. Another quick example is that we've also seen 2 customers drop their LinkedIn licenses drastically. So not only saving them costs, but really they were seeing side by side other networks and other job boards that they were getting more applications at a lower cost. So when you can see source of influence points side by side other channels, you really can get that insight into where you can save money and optimize your spend. And I think a big challenge today with data is that you're pulling it from many different sources and from tracking it in many different ways. You can't get that one full view.
I would also add here, I totally agree with all these points. Another really strong value of source of influence and being able to get these points of data is it allows you to report back to management in a really strategic way. So it goes beyond just the value of what recruiters do, translating into getting people in seats within a certain time. It shows a much more sophisticated understanding of the larger ecosystem that the company is operating in and telling that story, which I also think is a really valuable piece of that. So we talk about the strongest value of source of influence in reallocating spend shifting tactics. You had given a great example. I also just wanted to share a Glassdoor client, Wilson HCG. When we asked about how Glassdoor impacts their talent attraction at their company, we got this quote from their CEO, which speaks to Glassdoor's impact on influencing candidates, that they saw over 50% of candidates report using Glassdoor at some point in their job search. Again, Glassdoor is one of many platforms that people come to kind of validate and research, test out, see if what they're hearing is kind of legit. We also see that on Glassdoor, applicants who used Glassdoor as part of their research process are 2 times more qualified and 2 times greater influence over their decision when they saw an increase in awareness and influence over candidate decisions. So what that tells us is that candidates who are more informed are more likely to apply. Candidates who are more informed are more likely to accept as well. I think part of that, again, goes back to I know the information I need to know. That allows me to opt out and also allows me to opt in. And in the end, you want to increase efficiencies all the way through. I think a time to hire statistic is often a, pretty basic stat that people look at. I also think it's a really important one because it talks about then the inefficiencies that are taken out. If you're able to hire them pretty quickly, that's not just a metric of, getting them in the seat fast. It's a metric of all of these things working together really well, that at the end of the day, when you have a smart strategy in place, you're going after the right people, you have the right messages, they can make a decision quickly. That impacts time to hire. And again, it's not a linear journey. We see job seekers checking many different sources along the way, so it really is important to be able to engage and watch what they're doing.
Yeah, I love all of your points there, and really this tells me that obviously the influence of Glassdoor is amazingly awesome. And, this is why SmashFly and Glassdoor are partner, and, we do a lot of content and webinars together. We definitely see recruitment marketing the same way. And we also know that Glassdoor is a huge priority for many of our customers. So one of our customers actually sends their great Glassdoor reviews as email nurture touchpoints to their top applicants. So after those candidates apply, we're not just going dark. The customers actually want to nurture them and let them know that their employer brand is strong, that interviewees like the process, that employees are happy. And so, as Kirsten was saying, a more educated applicant and a more educated candidate, they're probably likely to make a decision more quickly. So So I thought that was a great example of using Glassdoor reviews and Glassdoor ratings in your nurture touch points in order to inform them and really promote their employer brand throughout the process to get that offer. So we've reached the end, and before we get into questions, I just wanted to go through a few key takeaways, although I feel like the messages of this webinar are pretty clear. But basically, the collective interactions you have with candidates greatly affect who applies and who doesn't apply. And they also really influence your candidate's perception of your employer brand. And hopefully we've proven that with a lot of great stats and a lot of examples of what actual organizations are doing. So source of influence is your recruitment marketing. It's all of those channels pre-apply. And as we've been talking about, source of influence helps you get more insight into that candidate journey. And in order to improve it, you have to understand it and you have to have proof. You can't just be shooting in the dark in terms of your budget and resources and really where to start in improving that. And then source of hire is really only one data point. It's super important, but it's only that point of conversion. And as Kirsten and I have mentioned, there's so many other influencers that drive candidates to apply. So really, to mature your recruitment marketing, you have to have that full picture and understand more of the touch points. And then lastly, it's that understanding what's working and what's not. And that's really the most beneficial for the people that make the budget and for the people that, give the resources. You want to understand what channels are effective, what channels aren't, how are your new campaigns working for you, and how are they not. So that's really going to help you make better decisions and better spend and make the right decisions for the long term in order to get better quality hires.
All right. Well, Elise, Kirsten, I want to thank you both for an outstanding presentation. That was wonderful. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's been great. Yeah. So now we'll move into the Q&A section. We've had a lot of great questions coming in during the webinar. So we've got a couple minutes here. Let's see how many of those we can get to before we hit the top of the hour. No rush, though. All right, our first question here. Someone asked, how can I track source of influence without technology? Elise, did you have an answer to that?
Yeah, I think that Kristen and I probably both have answers to this as we come from kind of different areas. I would say that technology is obviously the most accurate and centralized way to track. With everything in one view, you're really going to get that side-by-side metrics and be able to see what's happening and compare apples to apples. But if you don't have technology in place, I'll hand this over to Kirsten because she had some great feedback earlier in the webinar.
Yeah, I would say just ask the questions. So when people are coming into interview, so first you would just want to think about, like, what's the information you most need? So you're trying to figure out, where did they find their information? What was the most influential when they made a decision? At what point were they ready to apply? You maybe pick a couple things with your team that you feel like are really critical pieces we want to answer. Have a checklist, and for everyone who comes into interview, same as like when you go to the Gap, and you're done, and they say, here's $20 if you fill out this little survey, you'll be in the running to win a prize or whatever, right? So in a similar way, when someone's done interviewing, say, hey, if you're willing, we would love to just ask you a couple questions to help us get better about reaching out to great candidates like yourself. Have them take 2 minutes, or you can send it to them afterwards in a follow-up email. You also can start with the teams that you have. So go out to them, maybe take all the folks who've been hired in the last 6 months, maybe do a couple focus groups, pull them into a room, and say, hey, we're trying to get some baseline information. Would love some feedback from you, and just have a discussion with them. That can be a really smart place to get a baseline. And then you can start to put some tracking metrics in little by little to help validate some of that and get smarter. I think the more data you're able to get, the smarter you can get about it, the better results you get, and then the money can come to be able to track technology.
And one more thing, if you guys haven't, you should definitely look at the candidate experience report. So if surveying is also kind of a big undertaking, they do a great candidate survey every year, and the report findings are really interesting. You can take some of those stats and then look into kind of your own data, whatever you have, and try to see if that aligns.
All right. Those are some awesome ideas. Thanks for sharing, ladies. All right, here's another question. How can you define recruitment marketing in a few sentences? Elise, that might be a good one for you.
Summing up recruitment marketing in a few sentences.
Yep.
So I would say that it is every tactic and strategy you use to find, attract, engage, and nurture leads to become applicants now and in the future. So that's really how I would sum it up, and I would say that the goals are to communicate employer brand, to build that pipeline of quality talent for the future, and to fill job recs with quality candidates who are more informed.
You killed that one. Hit that right on the head. Thanks.
I'm the content manager for SmashFly. I need to know that.
Too true. Well, Kirsten, I have a question for you here. I think it was you who said this. Someone asked, can you repeat the statistic about how managing your employer brand affects applicant conversion rates? Like, do you remember that one off the top of your head?
I had a couple.
I think it was in the 60s.
That, yes. I think the one that we were talking about there, so there's two really. One is that 69% of active job seekers are likely to apply if they see the company engage with the brand.
All right. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the one they were talking about too. That sounds right.
And this is specifically on Glassdoor, so when I say engage with a brand, I mean responding to reviews, updating their profile, sharing updates in the update section. So when people come to the page and they see that a company, it's not just sort of a set it and forget it, static page, but they see them interacting, managing it, it sends a powerful signal, right? 69% say they're more likely to apply.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. And then, Kirsten, another question for you.
Okay.
When it comes to building personas, where do you suggest I start?
Again, I think a great place to start is with your own employees. So sitting down with some of your engineers, sitting down with some of your marketers and marketing team, and asking them about themselves. Who are you? What most do you value in your role? If you were to leave, why? Why do you stay here? There's some pretty, just get to know them. And then even as you start to develop your messaging that you feel like is segmented, getting a little feedback, and more effective, you also can go back to that group and test it. Does this appeal to you? Would this be compelling for you? And then the second piece I would say is reach out. I don't know if you guys are hearing that feedback.
Yeah, I'm getting a little feedback too. Yeah, sorry about that.
I don't know what's going on. The second piece I would say is reach out to your marketing team. They've probably developed personas for your own customer bases, and ask them about a process and have them bring you into it a little bit, or ask them to help you and say, hey, the same way you guys are doing this for our customers for our product, I would love to do this for recruiting, and I would love your help in how we might do that from a process perspective.
Those are great suggestions. I echo those.
All right. Well, Elise, Kirsten, thank you so much for your insightful responses. I think that we're at 3 p.m. now on the East Coast. We're at the top of the hour, so we're going to wrap it up. But for everybody still listening, if we didn't get to your question, we're going to do what we always do with webinars, which is round up the rest of the questions and address them in a blog post over on the SmashFly blog. So keep an eye out for that. And we will be sending out slides and recordings very soon. So thank you so much for coming today. I hope you guys enjoyed the webinar. We were really pumped to have you here. And everybody, enjoy the rest of your day. Again, another big thank you to Elise and Kirsten. You guys were awesome.